means that if there's no protection when you're fired, injured, or otherwise put out of work, again, this puts enormous pressure on the kind of content that you're willing to serve up to your editor. How many times are you willing to really go to bat for something that you believe in or something that is important out there if this threatens the interests of one of your sponsors or the advertisers? Finally, the sort of third problem I wanted to talk about is the use of interns as basically to replace staff. One organization I worked for when I was first starting out, I'm not going to tell you what it was, but there was basically a full-time staff of about 3 or 5 people and a full complement of anywhere between 11 and 15 interns. If you see this sort of setup operating, you know that the very business model is based on essentially slave labor. And this isn't just a problem in Brussels, this is widespread, but we do see this in particular here, particularly amongst young journalists. It's very hard to go for any length of time as an intern without proper pay. And so this also has an effect on the kind of journalism, the output that we produce. Why? Because the very kind of people the only kind of people who are able to go for any length of period, for 6 months or a year without pay or without decent pay, will tend to come from a more middle-class background. This means that the kind of different perspectives from more from people who come from poor working-class backgrounds, women, immigrants, people of color, there will be fewer and fewer alternative perspectives in the content that is put out there. All of this together, these three things, the work for no pay, the fonds indépendants, the interns as workers, all of which makes it very difficult to make a living as a journalist. I say that there are quite a few young journalists here as well, and I wonder if they've had similar sorts of experiences. Perhaps they can add to some of this. All this means that journalists are more likely to accept commercial pressures on their output and less likely to stand up for, again, as I said, these traditional principles of journalistic ethics. Additionally, while here in Brussels, there may be relatively little so-called real journalism, there is actually quite a lot of work as a writer, working for trade magazines, communications work for the various institutions, public relations work, research, editing, sub-editing, and communications work for the various corporations, NGOs, and think tanks. Not all the other various different organizations and institutions that have offices here. Some of these actually pay fairly well, and so journalists will very often take this kind of work to subsidize their so-called real journalism. But again, what does this mean? This means that we can be receiving a paycheck from the very same people that we are supposed to cover elsewhere, and about whom we are supposed to have a neutral, balanced perspective. In conclusion, what are the dangers of all of this? What are the dangers to democracy? I think that, first of all, this means that the public, both the sort of specialist public here, the stakeholders, the policymakers, and researchers, and lobbyists, and so on, as well as the broader public, receive a filtered message, and one that offers fewer critical perspectives, and is certainly more commercially friendly. Following on from this, there's a knock-on effect on the national media outlets, who are depending more and more on the specialist EU publications for their European institutional coverage, especially those who no longer have any correspondents in Brussels. Again, so it's not just here in Brussels, but at the national level, the public is receiving a filtered message, a message that is less critical and is more commercially friendly. And I think young journalists in particular, after a few years of working in this sort of atmosphere, this is the only sort of working environment that we know. We're growing up in a sort of bad atmosphere where traditions of balanced, neutral reporting are not the norm, or at least are being diminished. This has an enormous import for democracy, both at the national and at the European level. Well, what can be done? It's a very big question. I think I can focus on a few small things that are actually relatively easy to be accomplished. First of all, both journalists and media employers need to aim for a balance between profitable media and honest reporting. This means that employers need to ensure that there is a Berlin Wall between editorial and the commercial sides of their businesses. And we journalists also have a responsibility to stand up and fight for this Berlin Wall, to ensure that we aren't blurring the line between content, between editorial and the commercial interests of our publications. But in the end, as Aidan said, this isn't a battle between us workers, us journalists, and our employers, because this also makes commercial sense as well. As readers are much more likely to trust honest, neutral publications than they are if the publications they know are being manipulated by lobbyists or corporate interests. Secondly, I think we need strong legislation that protects the rights of interns, both for themselves, their own rights, so that they aren't exploited, and for other working journalists who we cannot compete with what is effectively, as I said, slave labor. That's the legislative side. There's also things that we can do as well as journalists. When there are interns in our offices, and we do see these sorts of things going on, when we do see the increasing numbers of faux indépendants in our offices, if we are full-time journalists in those same offices, we need to stand up and say, this isn't right. Both to our employers and also to inform our workmates and colleagues who are interns, who are faux indépendants, and say, look, you don't have to put up with this when they're being exploited. We don't want a situation where we full-time journalists are competing against people who are being exploited even worse than we are. We need to join together to fight the common problems. So that means basically that we can play a role there as well in our own workplaces. I would also like to see legislation to halt the growing phenomenon of the faux indépendant period. This is not just an issue in terms of journalism, but in terms of increasing sort of agency workers, and this is particularly a problem in the UK and Ireland, where I believe it's now something like a quarter of the workforce is technically agency workers. This diminishes your right to work, your social security rights, pensions, and so on and so forth. We're returning to an era from the 1920s and 1930s where the security that we built up in the post-war period for working people is steadily being diminished. But we can stop this. Above all, I think we need to be less timid as journalists and stand up for the career that we've chosen, for the career that we love, and the principles of honest reporting that have sustained us thus far. Aidan also mentioned the code of conduct. I do encourage people to have a look at that and do attempt to adhere to that. The fortunate thing with this is that there aren't any teeth to it, and I want people to begin thinking about what ways we can begin to put some teeth to this code of conduct for journalists in Brussels. And finally, if you're an English language journalist, and you're not a member of the National Union of Journalists, you should join the NUJ. You don't have to be from England or Ireland, but if you work in the English language. Alternately, absolutely join API, and if you're a Belgian journalist, please join the AJP. These are the best organizations that help us collectively stand up for our rights as journalists and for quality in journalism. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. That's absolutely right. Join something. I think it's absolutely right. Because there's one thing that actually is damaging to journalism today. It's the notion that as individuals, we actually don't have a collective responsibility. And increasingly we find in journalism the notion that you go out on your own, you do your own thing, you do your own job, you negotiate your own contract, you look after yourself. It's a complete nonsense and myth which is actually damaging to the whole sort of fabric of the nature of journalism. We have to work together. Lee, thanks for that. And also for drawing attention to the crisis facing young people in particular. The scandal of the way that interns are used as slave labour in modern journalism is quite frankly shocking. And it's a story that's not properly told. Young people who leave journalism school desperate to get a foothold on the career of journalism will work for nothing on 2-month, 1-month contracts, 3-month contracts, moving around from media to media for years in the hope, like a piece of Velcro, they'll stick somewhere, that they'll be able to get a job. It is a shocking state of affairs, which actually in any civilized society really should not be tolerated at all. And it also destroys something which I think has been really lost in journalism, which you draw attention to.